Keith Morgan, welcome to the Bookaholic Podcast.
Thank you so much.
Yes, glad to have you here. You know, Ruta's Closet is a Holocaust story, basically. And we all know that there are a lot of Holocaust stories out there. All of them are important, but what makes this Holocaust story different and also important?
Yes, there are many biographies out there. What makes this very different, I believe, is that, yes, it focuses on one particular family who survived the Holocaust in Shavel, Lithuania, but it also gives an account of what happened in the rest of the ghetto, the major events, primarily because the family focus, they were prominent citizens, you might say,
Mhm.
in that area. So they served in various roles and knew what was going on elsewhere. I think what also makes this different is that it's the family messages. It's the messages about being prepared, for what is unknown, really, but being prepared to adapt, being prepared to use all your resources, being dependent on neighbors and friends,
Mhm. Mhm.
stories that we need now. Um,
Right.
there are messages. I always sign off the book when I'm doing signing off books at meetings. I always put the line in, you know, a lesson from yesterday to be learned today and remembered tomorrow. And that speaks to the fact that there are so many warnings in this story about what can happen anytime unless we're vigilant and we look out for what's happening. I did it because I also wanted it to inspire others in other situations to
Right.
step up. I
Yes.
believe there's so much evidence in this book of people at their best and
Yes.
people at their worst.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, we're going to touch a little bit on that in a little bit. But how did you get connected with Ruth Krone-Siegel? Is that the right pronunciation
Correct.
of her name?
Yes, it is. It
Okay.
is.
How did you even get connected with this story?
A little bit of history there, if you'll bear with me, Deirdre.
Absolutely.
Um, I was, as you can probably tell, a Brit schoolboy in the
Yes.
north of England, born after the war, 1954. Oh, given that one away, haven't I? And we were brought up, in school history. We learned about the Second World War. So
Absolutely.
it was very close, of course, and so we were brought up on all of that. But I had friends in my class who were Jews. They told a different story. They told a story of not of brave soldiers coming back home, but of lost family members overseas in Europe. They talked about concentration camps. They talked about being gassed, about mass murders. And being one of those teens, impressionable, I said, one of these days, I'm going to do something that tells their side of
Mhm.
the story. Here I am, a teenager who doesn't know what he's going to do for
Mhm.
work when he finishes
Right.
school. But I arrived in Vancouver in 1980. Went to work for the Province newspaper as a reporter, actually as a
Mhm.
crime reporter primarily, where I learned my investigative skills, and one day, 1997, my editor came to me and said, I'd really like you to write a column about your neighbors, people who make a difference in the lives of others. And I thought, I really like that idea.
Yeah.
And anyway, some family friends said to me, yeah, you should go and see Ruth Krone-Siegel. She talks to youngsters about her Holocaust experience. Fate. That's how I started. And
Wow.
I went to see her at the Vancouver Holocaust Center, talk to a group of teenagers, and probably about the age I was when I first heard the stories from my Jewish friends.
Right.
And they came in noisy, as they do.
Yeah. Yeah.
Boy, were they quiet as she made her
Yeah.
presentation. They could relate to it. And there's another part of this. They have parents.
Yeah.
They were
Right.
pleased of what her parents did.
Right.
So these little guys were getting themselves involved in this. And
Right.
anyway, she told the story, and as a newspaper guy, I could see there were lots of elements to this story that were really fascinating, and there was going to be a challenge to get the stories out. Years have passed, of course, but I was quite determined I would do that, and that's how it got started. And I think I can say that the thing that got to me, that gets to most people about her
Mm-hmm.
story, is how she lost her sister.
Oh.
Uh, and I guess I'm jumping ahead a little bit here, but I think it's important because that's really what swung it for me, I suppose. And that was that
Right.
she, a little sister, Tamara, who was about 3 years younger, 4-ish at the time, the
Mm-hmm.
ghetto was surrounded, and they came in and removed every child on trucks, and they got on a train, and they went to Auschwitz, and that was the end.
Oh my goodness.
And the story is that they hid all day in their uncle's place because he was single, and they thought they'd be safe there. Her parents had this plan ahead. If anything happens, you go to Uncle Wolf's place.
Right.
And they did. And they hid under the floorboards. They hid in the closet. And then finally, Ruth thought, you know what? It's the end of the day now. And Tamara's crying a little. I think maybe it's time to come out.
Go
She
out.
came out and she was spotted. They were thrown on the back of a truck. And after a few minutes, they could see Uncle Wolf ahead of them. And he was arguing with this commandant who was a vicious you-know-what. And
Yes.
getting into a real heated debate. What was this about? What was Uncle Wolf doing there? Anyway, suddenly a ghetto policeman who were Jewish, they looked after the internal goings on, as it were, he came to the back of the truck and he took Tamara off the truck. And the truck pulled away, and Ruth saw her little sister, little scrawny, tiny girl, reaching out, saying, Ruta, don't go, don't leave me. Something that stuck with her for the rest of her life,
Oh my
and
goodness.
certainly
Yeah.
mine. And
Right. And just listening to you say it right now is making my heart sink.
you can think yourself, you can look at your children, your grandchildren, and you say, oh my goodness.
Yes,
And
absolutely.
and so that's really got me going. And I think after many talks with Ruth, I did a 4-part newspaper series just aimed at young people, and I did it as a cliffhanger, an episode per day, because this story it's so dramatic, it lends itself to that. And I thought, what I'll do is I'll also bring into the feature, I'll bring in what was happening elsewhere in the world during the war at the specific time of that bit I was
Right.
covering.
Right.
And because I wanted to broaden the educational value of it. And then the Holocaust Center here, they devised a bunch of questions for kids at school to then follow up on it. Well,
Right.
it was it was called Hidden from the Holocaust. It was phenomenally successful. And I was the big guy in town because I think they increased their sales by I don't know how many thousand copies per day. But
Right.
my point was the story was getting out there. And then it just became obvious to both of us that there was a book needed to be done. And that's how that started. So that's a very long-winded explanation, but I think it's valuable because you can see how I got wrapped up in it, and it became my mission too.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Now, let me say this, and I am a seasoned individual. I never thought of, we hear about Germany, we hear about Poland, we hear about the resistance and the folks in France, and and all of that. People getting sent to Switzerland and this type of thing. I know my father-in-law was sent to London,
Mm.
and
Oh,
so my I never knew about Lithuania.
mhm.
I'm going to say I never even knew about that being a quote unquote participant in the whole Holocaust. I never thought about that as a place. So just even for the mere fact of place,
Mhm.
this book is important because I don't think a whole lot of people think of Lithuania when you think about the Holocaust. I don't think so.
No, and there's the cue for another story.
Yeah.
When we decided to do the book, I was going to write it. Obviously, she was going to cooperate and provide whatever she could. Um, One of her good friends who actually was part of the formation of the Holocaust Center here in Vancouver, Robert Krell, actually an internationally renowned psychiatrist, a survivor himself, actually from Amsterdam,
Mm.
a good friend of, and he came up to me and he said, I've got somebody to introduce you to who's going to really open doors, because he said, this is going to be a hard story to write. He said, Lithuanians are very reluctant to talk about what went on. And I
Oh,
said, oh, and he said, yeah, yeah. He said, he's a historian and he'll be very helpful to you. And I said, oh, well, who is this? He said, well, are you prepared to travel? I said, oh, of course. And he said, well, it'll take you back to London. And I said, oh, and then who is this? And he said, Sir Martin Gilbert. Well, Sir Martin Gilbert is the most published Holocaust author in the world, a
oh,
renowned historian, was, I should say, and he was Churchill's biographer, official biographer. So
wow.
you can imagine the
Wow.
UK British schoolboy in me. Oh my goodness, a knight
You
of the
were
realm,
geeked up.
a knight of the realm. And I went to him, and he was just remarkable. Over a period of years, he opened doors. He advised me on how to handle delicate matters, because there were many that I found about misdeeds of some families who still survive, about how much I should say, how much I should reveal.
Yeah.
And he was wonderful. And he told me right there on that first meeting, he looked at me in much the same way as Ruth did about
Wow.
telling her story being important. And he said, I'm familiar with Ruth's story. I've been to Vancouver a number of times. And he said, people don't know about Lithuania. And he said, and they should, because it has so many messages. And I'm saying, yes, I believe so. And he said, and then he said to me, you should write this like you write your crime stories in the Province newspaper. So here's a man who'd done his homework on me.
Yes, he
And
did.
said,
Yes, he
you've
did.
got to get through to non-Jews. You've got to get through to as many people as possible, because as I keep saying, we need to know. Don't hold back. And so he said, I've just returned from the Baltic states, and you don't have to scratch very far under the surface to have
Right.
people, especially in rural areas, who will say, well, Jews actually got what they deserved, really. And he said, so it's still there, all that many decades after. What people will be shocked, and I was initially, of course, was that up to 195,000 Jews in Lithuania were murdered.
Oh my.
So that's about 95, 97% of the Jewish population, leaving a couple of thousand, 3,000 maybe left, who managed to escape, or escape to Russia a lot of the time, right, to the Soviet
Mhm,
area,
mhm.
and those who survived the concentration camps. Well, I mean, that's mind blowing. But you know what's really mind blowing? We all know about Auschwitz and the concentration camps. But
Right.
what I'll bet most of my readers didn't know is that when the Nazis came in, they were going for Soviet Russia. That's what they were intending. So they had to pass through the Baltics.
Okay, okay.
As they did that, as they arrived in each town, they had just behind them the Einsatzkommando, they only had one job: go into the community, assemble all the Jews, find the collaborators they could use to do the killing, and then they did mass executions. That's how Maya Krone, that being Ruth's father, lost his sister. And I was able to not reenact it, but to pull it together on the various sources I had and describe what happened. And they basically marched out of town to a site in the woods, shot by collaborators, generally speaking, and pushed into a grave. They had to dig the grave first, and a mass grave. I mean, that's even beyond the concentration camps, right?
That
And
that
so, yeah,
that's
mind blowing.
horrifying. It's
Yeah.
very horrifying. I remember being a student myself and learning about the Holocaust. And I will say, and I grew up in a small town in North Carolina in the United States. And they told us everything. You saw the emaciated Jewish people in the striped suits at the concentration camps. You saw skeletons. You saw the whole thing. And I was grateful for that. We had some wonderful teachers, I must say, even in my small town growing up. They told us everything. I can't even think back to anything that they may have left out that I have not now discovered. So they were wonderful teachers, and the Holocaust hurt me then so much to my soul as a child, as it still does till today. The atrocities that have been done to people in this world is just totally unbearable, really. But again, we'll come back to some of the points that you spoke on and I just spoke on. So let's go to this, because I think a lot of people, I know the definition and the origination of the word ghetto. But here in the States, a lot of people associate the word ghetto with poor Black people living in the inner cities.
Yes, of course. Yes.
So let's go ahead and tell the audience the true origin of the word ghetto and describe to us a Jewish ghetto.
Okay, well, it was a place where the Nazi invasion could pull all of the Jews together in one area to control their activities. They were fenced, and then it was a source of slave labor.
Wow.
Okay, so in this case, the family, Maya Krone, was the chief engineer at the leather factory. The leather factory was how you lived, because if you could work there, you were exporting leather boots to the Nazi soldiers on the Eastern Front, and those things they needed that were leather. So it was a lifesaver. And actually, there's a fun story here. Maya knew that. And so what he did, he took on staff that he needed for the production that had no skills whatsoever. Oh, but he needed them. One was called would be called an electrician, which he would need, of course. But probably the most skill he had was to put a light bulb in. But he was, but that's what he did. He was kind of a Schindler act, He knew that was the key to survival. And so, he was a key person in getting jobs for people. I'm using the term loosely, obviously. But that was survival. But then the rest, those who couldn't work, they were of no use. They were consuming food.
Right.
So they were gone. So they would be the mass graves, they kept their children, because of course families wouldn't work very well, would they, if they suddenly had their children taken away from. This is initially, of course, and the very sick mysteriously would go too. That was a method of survival, but that was it. They were kept in the ghetto. Every morning they would get up, they would line up at the ghetto gates, and they would be marched through town to the factory or wherever else, they were working. And so then they were gone for the day. and the likes of Tamara and Ruta would they'd be left to do whatever they liked in the ghetto because there's no school. Wouldn't want that, would you?
Right.
And so they were at the time of their life in some ways, right? I mean, this is the
Right.
craziness of it. And
Right.
they would be able to play all day, and then of course they knew when their parents were coming back in the evening, because that meant food.
Right.
So of course, what's for supper, mum? And nothing different there, is there?
Right.
But they were also, what happened is they were a well-to-do family, the
Yeah.
Krones, and they
Yeah.
had a beautiful house. But they
Yes.
lost that, of course. And of course, the Nazis had their senior officers move into their house because it had to be a nice place for them to live, of course. And so they were put in this little, it's like a cabin, not really much bigger, with
Mhm.
about 12 other people, you know.
Right.
And then that's how it was.
Yeah.
And you know what? I know that was the case because when I went back to Lithuania with Ruth, we walked around the ghetto, and guess what? Most of those buildings are still there, and still in.
What?
Oh yeah, still there. I've got pictures of, and there are pictures in the book of not the place they were in, but one that was very much the same, would have 10,
Oh
12.
my.
And
Wow. The
so,
ghost stories there.
oh,
Ugh.
so, that's what the ghetto was like. And of course, they were, they brought, the food was brought in, but I can't remember how much it was, but it was nothing much. I mean, it would just about keep them going food wise. And of course, when they tried to, anybody that tried to smuggle food in, well, they were executed, because that's
Ugh.
clearly going against. I mean, there was one story which was really touching. It was all the kids were still there, and they wanted to make an example of a guy who came in and he'd smuggled about 2 or 3 cigarettes and a bit of bread or something, some food in. They caught him, and they decided they would execute him, and as an example, and they ordered every single member in the ghetto, including the likes of Tamara and Ruth, to attend the hanging.
Oh.
Uh, and so, but when I heard that, I mean, I could just have described that maybe in a couple of paragraphs, but I thought, no, I should try to get more on this. Unfortunately, that time, Maya and Gita, mum and dad, were dead. I couldn't interview them. It left me wonderful documents. And Ruth was very young at that time.
Yeah.
So I set out to find other survivors from that ghetto who witnessed the same. So I was able to reconstruct it because I did find survivors who told me about what they witnessed. And I was able to find out an account which described the man's last words. And these are inspirational. He's going to his death, and he asked for people to look after his wife and family, and he was going to give his worldly goods to anybody who need them. This is a man that's just about to be hanged. Isn't that an inspiration? I mean,
It
and
is. It's
so rather than just tell the horror story of the hanging, which I did, I was able to say, and this is what also happened. One of the things, you know this in media today, there's this real movement to be putting trigger warnings in everything. And I thought, no, when you pick up this book, it's not going to be an easy read.
right.
I thought, no, people need to know this.
They
They
do.
need to know the shock that you've just shown when I'm telling you about specific incidents.
Right.
That needs to go home.
Right.
And,
Right.
and then they need to ask their questions. What would that do if that was my uncle? What would I do if that was my child? We can't insulate and isolate. We need to tell people, because in history we can learn lots. I had a pastor friend from Washington State, and he used to, I'm a firm believer in what he used to do. He used to end his sermons on a Sunday and look at you and he'd say, I want you to find, may the words of this sermon disturb you profoundly. And I thought, he's also a great actor. And yes, what he did is part-time. And I thought, yeah, this is not easy. And may it disturb you, may it profoundly. And I've always stuck to that, because that was, another thought, in doing this in the way I did it. What next, Deirdre? Carry on. I could tell stories all day.
No, I was just waiting for you to complete your thought there.
Sorry. Yeah,
so, that harkens back to never forget. And I know that's an important phrase that Jewish people usually use concerning the Holocaust. I wish African Americans would also partake into that phrase, never forget. Because, there were different iterations of our stories, African Americans and Jews, but it still were atrocities and horrors that happened to both of these two sets of people. So the never forget, to go back when I said that there's a lot of Holocaust stories, but they're all important. They are all important. We have to keep writing. We have to keep people writing memoirs of the Holocaust. We have to have people keep writing books about slavery and Jim Crow era of the United States. We can't let people forget, because if you get slack and was like, okay, well, that was in the past, history bears repeating itself. And I feel a little like that's what's going on today. History is trying its best to repeat itself. And right now, to me, in the States, it's trying to make the civil rights era look like, oh, well, that, the Voting Rights Act, So go ahead.
Yeah, there's another phrase, isn't there, which you hear from Jews and others all the time, and that's never again. And
yes.
You look at yourself today, and you add a question mark to that. Say, never again. And I guess that's what we're both saying here. I don't know. I see things around that are more, definitely, could have been predicted. And I mean, that's what the book tells you. You see, what I also did is I went back into Meyer Krone's story himself as a youngster, traveling back and forth through Soviet states, and going to find food and bring things back for the family, and the pogroms, and the continual blaming of Jews for killing Christ, because by telling those stories, they were compelling stories, but what it told you is that armed him for what was coming from the Nazis. He knew what was coming. And in fact, as you know from the beginning of the book, they tried to actually escape, but some Stuka pilots had another idea. And they knew it. And, they, in fact, in some ways, they failed to heed the warnings, because they could see them coming even earlier. Many did get out. I've met people since who have. But, those are there. And, the story, I'll tell you the background to Ruth actually coming out of the closet, as it were, to tell her story, was that were the events in the Balkans in 1992, when the Serbians started to mass remove all Bosnian Muslims. You remember that? And then a couple of years later, we had Rwanda, where 600,000 members of the Tutsi ethnic group were disposed of. And she said, I'm older now. She was an older adult. And she said, it's time. I have to start telling people about what I went through, because it's coming again. And so, that motivated her. And there's an interesting side story there, of course, is that Putin went into Ukraine.
Right.
This sound familiar? And of course, all the people I know in Lithuania and the Baltics since then, they all think they're next. And so here we go.
Wow.
And of course, the Soviets are geniuses at propaganda, as you know, and
Yeah.
it's pervasive. And but it goes back a long way because they would when they retook Lithuania, as it were, when the Nazis were driven out. They indulged then, everything that was happening under the Nazis. They changed how it happened, and gave a different side to the story. And it's just the same. It's the same today. And I mean, what we have now, though, is the problem is compounded by the fact that we have this social media, which should be for the good, but
Right.
that, oh boy, is it being misused and abused.
Absolutely.
Oh,
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes, it is definitely being misused. And, you know, uh, with anti-Semitism and all of this stuff back on the rise, it's just like obvious hate. And from the Black American perspective, African American perspective, it's just that we feel like they don't even wear robes anymore, robes
no,
and mask anymore. They're just out there.
I,
Who could have been the Ku Klux Klan.
yeah.
They're just showing themselves for who they are.
Tell you what was amazing to me. I guess it was about a year and a half ago. I was doing some research where I was speaking around various places, and I came across that latest document from the Anti-Defamation League, in which they revealed that in the past decade, anti-Semitic acts in the United States have leapt 893% over that past decade.
Yes.
That's
Yes.
not an arithmetical error. That's
Right.
what
No.
happened.
No.
And what that also said to me is that, oh boy, this education, this awareness has got to be stepped up because it's multi-generational. We have now
Yes.
learned, of course, that that the Iranians have been geniuses at penetrating social media for youngsters. And and right after the horrible situation in Israel where Hamas went in there and murdered hundreds, boom, the next day they're out with justifications and people, and it's mythical and this kind of stuff. And that you just look at that and you say, oh my goodness, this is the young folks again. But we've also got and I'm, people who were born after me, who after the war with no living memory, and even their parents really, yeah, they may have been in the war. Grandpa was probably around the war, but it's moved on, and so people are again not paying attention, and they're getting swung into stories that are just ridiculous. I mean, you've seen the growth of Holocaust denial. Excuse me,
Yes.
into Auschwitz. The
Yes.
ovens are still there. They're there.
Yes.
It happened. I
Yes.
also, I went to Dachau and I walked around there and I thought, yeah, some of the people that were in the book went to Dachau and it's exactly as they described, So, I mean, that's just so much BS, if I can be impolite. It's just not it's just wrong, but it's out there, and
Yes, it
casting
is.
down this, and so we've got a multi-generational thing. And that's why we got the Holocaust Center here. They created a study guide to Ruta's Closet for kids, for teachers, and
Ooh.
oh yeah, it's really good. It's a free download from
Yes.
rutascloset.com. Yes,
Yes.
and they also did. I mean, this was smart. They're really smart. They produced another document called Talking Points, and this is for book clubs. But the reality, it's for any adult because when you read the book and you see these talking points, now as you're going through it, of course, you're thinking about these things. But what that does is say, what about this? What about that? Would this be different now? And so I've been, that's also on my website. So that's available. But what I'm doing now is I have a 12-year-old grandson. He's starting to learn a little bit about the Second World War. And actually he's read a couple of books, good teachers, which are actually aimed at the younger generation. I looked at Ruta's Closet and I thought, this is very much an adult book. But you know what? Maybe it's time to try to make a youth version of it, which is easy to read. And so I looked at my friends at the Holocaust Center and said, so that's your next task. And so we're going to talk about that. But listen, I have something which is potentially controversial. And that is that what I'm thinking about, we're hearing all these horrible stories about AI.
Yes.
What if we could harness AI to do something educational? So I'm thinking of approaching, I'm not sure who are the good guys at the moment, but there are one or two AI, I mean, you know who I'm talking about, who will stud up to do this. And I'm thinking of approaching them and saying, hey, here's a project, because it's going to take 10 minutes, right, when they get it.
Right.
How about we aim one at 12-year-olds and one even at 8-year-olds versions?
Right.
I think that would be really something to try. And I want to the education folks here, and they say, well, if you do that, we'll gladly look over it to see if there are any blatant, ooh, no, you don't want to do that way. So I'm probably going to pursue that. But I think that's what we should do. I'm in, and I got interested in that particular side of things because I think it was about 1.5 years ago, Google was playing around with something like that, and they were inviting people to submit their reports to the office, if you were doing it in a company, and it was going to tailor stuff for you. And so what I did is I sent a 300-400 word kind of summation of Ruta's Closet to this. And I got a miniature radio show back from 2 people, young guy, young woman, talking about Ruta's Closet so enthusiastically and why it was important. I didn't put that stuff in there. I just gave a straight summary. But we'll call it it was able to discern that this was an important story we shouldn't forget.
Right. Absolutely.
And I know it kind of did extra research because it went out to find, I hadn't put the name of the ghetto in. So it went out and found one. It got the wrong one, but doesn't matter. And then they'd got some pronunciations wrong of names. But it was fascinating because it went the next step. I didn't tell it to do this. But at the end, they're both saying, well, this is a really important story that needs to be told again, blah, blah. I'm thinking, okay, and most people were fooled. They thought it was a morning radio show, and it wasn't. So I want us to use as many ways as we can. So that's why we decided to take the book beyond, because of the accessibility of the story and its relationship to families, right? And I wanted to say, let's use everything that's there, and I thought, well, it's that. Then we decided, I'm working on a podcast, and we've done 6 episodes ready to go. We're waiting for some funding for the end of the year. But what we did is we took a chapter, I read it, which is on the audio book, and then we got the backstory. I told the backstory, like I'm doing with you, how I got the story, and then we did. I went back to the story, the features I did, and I got 2 BBC friends of mine, retired BBC news people, and we constructed a news from the front, coming from a basement in London, right? So it was contemporaneous with that particular chapter, and they read it very well, of course, and because I wanted to broaden it and say, hey, this is what was going on here, and this was going there. And then I got a couple of morning DJ friends of mine. One of the guys is doing movie reviews with on Holocaust. And then his wife is doing books. And then we're focusing on general books, but always with one book for children.
Right.
So
Absolutely.
with that, and then I'm doing interviews with people around the world who I believe are at the lead in Holocaust awareness initiatives. Uh,
Yes.
Very interesting, some of the things that's going on. And
Right.
then I'm doing it on Zoom, good old Zoom. And
Yes.
so we're, I guess, in about a month's time, 2 months' time, we're starting a YouTube channel, and we'll
Yes.
put them all up there,
Right.
because those are things that people who are video folks can go to and look at and learn from them.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So you got to use everything at your disposal and not be
Yes.
frightened to try things.
Well, as we were speaking a little bit earlier, social media can be very negative.
Mm.
AI can be used negatively, but I have seen both used
Yes.
positively. There's a lot of social media activists out there on
Mm.
various fronts, from what we're talking about today for Jewish or African American, or for the LGBTQ community. There are a lot of activists out there, and then there's a lot of good that AI can do. But the writing of a book is still a great activist stance, and we need all that we can get. I agree with you. And Keith, I want to just thank you so much for joining me today. And we will certainly have information about Ruta's Closet in the podcast show notes, as well as the video description box on YouTube. And any free links, that child study guide, I would love to have that part of it as well. So
Well,
if you could provide that to
to
me,
help
that
you
would
instantly
be
on
great.
that, it's all on rutascloset.com. It's
Oh,
all up there. So
okay,
you
perfect.
can
We'll
grab
just
that.
have the link to rutascloset.com.
And let me just tease your audience. Just let me
Okay.
tease. Wait till you read about how Ruth was rescued and why.
Oh, yes. Ruth's Rescue. Okay,
Because
guys.
the rescuers were just doing the right thing.
We'll have a link to the book and the podcast show notes and the video description box on YouTube. And you guys, if interviews from authors is what you like and reading is your passion, please like this video and give us a comment below what you thought about this interview, and follow me. Thank you so much, Keith. I appreciate you.
Thank you so much, you.